Hello, Vikings. For those of you who've not met me yet, I'm Russell Lee, one of your Viking enrichment lecturers. And let me start by giving you a little bit of background about myself. I'm here in sunny California, where we're currently sheltering in place. In a previous life, I was an executive speechwriter. And interestingly enough, the skill set required to be an executive speechwriter is a lot like the skill set required to be a cruise lecturer. Who knew? Anyway, I'm very sorry that I don't get to be aboard a ship with you right now doing this, but I'm very excited that I have the opportunity to be here on Viking TV. This is actually an opportunity for us to have a much more relaxed, almost one-on-one conversation, which is great. And the only thing I'm missing is the interactivity. So this is what I'd like to propose. If you're watching this live, you'll notice on the right side of your screen, there's an area where you could submit a question. Now, certainly you can use that to submit questions throughout today, but I'd also like to use it for me asking you questions. Throughout my presentation today, I'll be asking some various trivia questions, and I'll try to give credit to the first person who responds correctly. So what you may want to do to prepare is go ahead and pre-fill out your name and your information like that. That way, when I pop out a trivia question, you can write in your answer and submit it and try to be first. Now, if you don't want to do that, don't worry. There's going to be no test at the end, anything like that. In fact, if this is your first time on Viking TV, this is my first time on Viking TV also. So we'll muddle through it together. So with that, are you ready to hear a great story? If so, just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Today, we're going to talk about Mona Lisa. Let's go ahead and bring up that presentation. So Mona Lisa is one of the most iconic paintings and most famous faces anywhere in the world. This is a lecture that you would normally see on an ocean cruise going through trade routes in the Middle Ages, where we go to Le Havre and there is an expedition that will actually take you into Paris from an ocean cruise, believe it or not. So maybe one of these days you'll catch me live aboard ship delivering that. In the meantime, we're here on Viking TV doing the same thing. So we're going to talk about fascinating facts about the Mona Lisa. And to start off, the Mona Lisa is in Paris. She is in the Louvre. This next image that I'm going to bring up is going to show you where she resides right now. By the way, I've got my official Serrano clicker here from San Felipe, so hopefully we'll have no technical difficulties with that. The Mona Lisa is housed behind 3 panes of bulletproof glass. In this case, that weighs 18 pounds. It is temperature controlled, climate controlled, environment controlled. In fact, there are 9 pounds of gel wrapped up in this frame. So if for any reason the power ever goes out, she will still be preserved. This case is opened once a year to make sure nothing's happened. It's promptly shut again, and that's the only exposure Mona Lisa has to the outside world. She has her own private room here in the Louvre where you can view her. However, if you happen to go there on a hot summer crowded day, your view is probably going to look more like this next image. So 6 million people view Lisa every year. The average viewing time is 15 seconds. You stand in line to get in the room. You have just about enough time to snap a selfie or a quick photo of her, and then the line behind you kind of pushes you out of the room. But you are in luck because today you're going to get an up-close, intimate, personal view of the Mona Lisa without the crowd, okay? So, Mona Lisa has her own mailbox at the Louvre where she receives cards, photos, letters, even flowers. There is a huge mystique about her, but again, we're going to start with some trivia questions. Let me pop out with the first one, okay? So the first question is, what is the name of this painting? Anybody have an idea? Let's see if I've got my handy tablet here with your Q&A, and let's see if anybody comes in. Okay, the name of this painting, believe it or not, is not Mona Lisa. The name is La Gioconda, which means the light-hearted woman. That is actually a play on words because the model was the wife of a man named Del Giocondo. And so Da Vinci actually made a little pun on her name, okay? That begs the question, what does Mona Lisa mean? Well, Lisa was the name of this model, and Mona is actually an Italian term of endearment. It's actually spelled M-O-N-N-A. It may mean lady or madam or mama. So the nickname is Mama Lisa. Okay, let's go on to the next question. What is she doing in France? The artist Leonardo da Vinci was one of the most famous Renaissance painters of Italy. Mona Lisa was actually painted in Italy. So how did she get to France? Was she brought there legally? Was she brought there illegally? Okay, I see some answers coming in here from the last question. Yes, Jean from Baskin Ridge, it is La Joconde in French or La Gioconda in Italian. Very good. Okay, so as far as what is she doing in France, there is one of these rumors that she was stolen by Napoleon and taken from Italy to France illegally. That is not true. Da Vinci brought her to France himself, and so she is there legally. She is in Paris legally. Okay, next trivia question. Let's bring that up, graphic. And that is, how does she measure up? How big is Mona Lisa? For those of you who've seen her, you know that she is actually quite small, as you saw from the photos I showed before. In fact, she is only about 21 inches by 30 inches, about the size of 4 sheets of letter paper or 4 sheets of A4 paper stuck together. Quite small. Okay, next question. What is she made of? What is she made of? What is she painted with as far as a medium? And what is she painted on? I'll give you a hint. She is not painted on canvas. Okay, yes, I see answers coming in here. Lydia from Roanoke, Leonardo died in France. That is absolutely true. He brought her there himself. Okay, what is she made of? She is, of course, painted on oil, but she is not painted on canvas. She is painted on 3 planks of poplar wood, each about 1.5 inches thick. At that time, Renaissance artists were familiar with canvas, which they used for broader landscapes and things like that. But for portraits, they preferred to paint on wood. They thought that was a better medium for capturing people's faces. In fact, let's spin Mona Lisa around so you can look at the back. If you'll notice, here's a view of those 3 pieces of poplar wood. In fact, there's a butterfly clip there that is holding 2 of the pieces together that have started to separate. So now you can tell people you've seen the back of the Mona Lisa. Okay, let's flip her back around to the front. So let's in fact close in on the master view of Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa has engendered all kinds of emotional responses over the past 500 years. In 1852, there was a starving artist in Paris who jumped off the 4th floor of a Paris hotel, committed suicide. In his suicide note, he wrote, "For years, I have grappled with her smile. I prefer to die." In 1910, a jilted lover walked into the Louvre and made sure that he was standing in front of Mona Lisa, staring into her eyes before he committed suicide, shooting himself in the head. My apologies for sharing some of these stories, but that just demonstrates how much emotion Lisa generates for people. So why is this painting so emotionally resonant and psychologically resonant with us? That's something that we're going to explore right now. And I apologize ahead of time. We're going to do some math, but don't worry, I'll walk you through it. So what you're going to see here on this next graphic is what is called the Fibonacci series. It is a mathematical numerical series that is nonlinear. The way you get at it is you take a number and you add it to the number to the left. So 1 plus nothing is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 3 is 5, etc., etc. So you get a curve that does not go straight up like this. It goes exponentially up. Now, what's interesting is when we take this Fibonacci series and we map it to a graph, as this next graphic shows. Over here on the right side, you see a 1 by 1 square, 3 by 3 square, 5 by 5 square. And if you draw an arc around there, you get this amazing curve that is known as the Fibonacci curve or the golden curve. And it is called the golden curve because it's very aesthetically pleasing to the eye and psychologically. You see it in nature in seashells, snail shells, flowers, the arrangement of a lot of natural patterns. You also see it in man-made objects, everything from stairwells to pieces of art, including the Mona Lisa. In fact, as this next graphic shows, we can take the Fibonacci curve and we can apply it to Mona Lisa. Let's see what happens when we do that. Let's start by turning this and moving it against the landscape background. If you'll notice, the ratio of different aspects of the landscape fit the Fibonacci curve. The curve of Lisa's arm, the arc around the sky, the height of the horizon, things like that. If we move in a little bit closer onto Mona Lisa herself, you'll see that the arrangement again of her arm, of her face, of the shape of her face against the background all follows this Fibonacci curve. Let's go in even closer on Mona Lisa's face. You'll see the arrangement of her eyes, her hair, her nose, her lips, all follow the Fibonacci curve. If we mirror that and view the other side of the portrait, you'll see the exact same thing on the other side of Mona Lisa. Now, did Da Vinci do this on purpose? He was certainly aware of mathematics, and he was a mathematician. He was also a very, very good compositional artist. There are no sketches that he left in his sketchbooks that show the Fibonacci curve against Mona Lisa, but that makes it even more remarkable that he might have done this simply aesthetically or subconsciously. But the fact remains that the layout of Mona Lisa, her face, her eyes, against the background, is just mathematically pleasing on a very subconscious psychological level. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so let's take off the Fibonacci curve and let's view Mona Lisa as she is by herself. And let's start by closing up on the landscape that's in the background. This is a technique that is called the sfumato technique, which in Italian means smokiness or blurriness. Now, if we look at the background on either side of Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci was one of the first artists to show background perspective as an aerial view, where you're not looking straight across at her, you're looking almost down at her, and that adds to the quality of this. Mona Lisa's, the midsection of the painting is about at her shoulder height, and that's where your eye is first drawn when you look at the painting. If you look at the background there, that's where you have the brown, very, very clear road on one side and bridge on the other side. This is very much in focus, and it is easy to discern the details of that. As your eye is drawn up the painting to look at her face and her eyes, subconsciously, the background there slowly fades into blurriness or sfumato, so that by the time you reach the horizon, it's very, very blurry. So that again gives you this ethereal, timeless quality of something amazing and infinite going on behind the figure. Okay, now let's zoom back out to see Mona Lisa in her entirety. Every few years, you have somebody, normally from an Italian town, who says, I recognize the background of that painting. That's my town. That mountain's in my town, that bridge is in my town, that road is in my town. Da Vinci painted that about my town. Now, the fact that there are about half a dozen different towns all claiming this kind of shows that it's still under some controversy. But the reason why this concept is important is because historians would like to know, was Da Vinci painting a realistic portrait of a woman against a real physical background? Or was he painting some kind of idealized fantasy of a woman against an imaginary background? That kind of makes a difference in how we would view Mona Lisa. Now, before I leave the background, there's one more thing I want to point out here, and we'll see if we can get a trivia question out of this as well. So, on the next graphic, it's going to circle, what are these objects? I'm sorry, I had one more thing I meant to talk about. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. One other thing that is interesting about the background is that the left and right sides of the landscape do not match. You'd have to line it up like this, a little bit askew, in order to get the background to line up. If you look at it this way, now you see that the horizon line matches and the road matches to the bridge. But that, of course, is not the way Da Vinci painted this. So let's go ahead and skew that back to normal. And the question I have, of course, is why did Da Vinci paint it that way? Was there some psychological reason? And I have not seen a very good explanation of why the left and the right sides of the background do not match, other than that the only person we can ask has long gone and we can't ask him anymore. Okay, so now let me get into the trivia question that I was going to ask you, which is, if we go to the next graphic, what are these two objects? What are these two objects? Okay, while you're toying with that question, let me make the comment that right after Da Vinci finished Mona Lisa, all of a sudden, other artists started creating copies of her. And if you look at one of these copies that this next graphic shows, you'll see something that is not in Da Vinci's version. You see pillars on the side. And those two little objects I showed were just the vestiges of those pillars on the side. Now that brings up the question, is the Mona Lisa everything that we should be seeing in that painting? I explained that she was painted on poplar wood. Is there a chance that Da Vinci's original painting originally looked something more like this, and that somehow the sides of the painting either got knocked off or cut off or sawed off by somebody? Well, again, this is a question that art historians asked, and they were able to take a look at the back of the painting, as I showed you previously, and see that there was a frame border of gesso around the outline of the back that Da Vinci used to prep the wood for the painting. And when they viewed this and examined it and measured it, they determined that that was the original composition of the painting. In other words, there are no missing sides. What you see on Mona Lisa is exactly what Da Vinci intended for you to see. And the copies with those extra pillars on the side, those are just things added by some artists. Okay, so what we are seeing is actually the original version of Mona Lisa. Okay, let me just check here, make sure we've got something here. Okay, Shelton over in Silver Spring, Maryland. You thought those were bales of hay? Very good guess. Those were pillars. Okay, so let me talk more about the copies of Mona Lisa that I alluded to. There were many copies created. In fact, the one that I'm going to show here in this next graphic is one that is on display. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let's talk more about Mona Lisa. And what I want to do now is talk about the features of her face, which is the most famous part of the painting. Right now, I want you to look at those eyes. There is something unusual about those eyes, and there's a very specific answer I'm looking for on the eyes of the Mona Lisa. Okay, I'll go ahead and review what I'm looking for. If you look at her eyes, there are no eyebrows and there are no eyelashes. Now, there are many theories about why that might be and why that gives her such an unusual look. One theory is that Italian women of the time purposely shaved their eyebrows and their eyelashes to look more fashionable. That doesn't happen to be a theory that I agree with. Another theory is that this is proof that Da Vinci never finished the painting. It is known that he worked on this painting until the day he died, and some scholars believe this demonstrates that he never finished it because he never got around to actually painting her eyelashes and her eyebrows. Now, there is a Parisian engineer, Pascal Cotta, who spent 3,000 hours studying Mona Lisa. And he says that if you look very closely using a microscope, you can actually see vestiges of eyebrows and eyelashes, particularly over her left eye and eyebrow. So his theory is that at one time, Lisa had eyelashes and eyebrows, but over the years, either that paint faded or somebody doing restoration work hundreds of years ago accidentally erased them. Still, it's very fascinating to think about what Mona Lisa would look like if she had eyebrows and eyelashes. Now let's move down to my favorite part of the painting, the smile. Mona Lisa's amazing, legendary smile. Somebody actually put this painting under facial recognition software in modern times, and the software determined that Lisa is 83% happy, 9% disgusted, 6% fearful, and 2% angry. Take that for what you will. But that smile is nevertheless legendary. Some people say she's smiling. Some people say she's not smiling. Some people say that her smile actually changes before her eyes, that it flickers between smiling and not smiling. That's part of the appeal of this painting. And there is actually a theory behind that as well. There was a Harvard neurologist, Margaret Livingstone, who explained that all of us have two kinds of vision. We have our fovea, or focal vision, which is in color, very focused. That's the vision that we use when you look into somebody else's eyes, you talk to them, or you're reading. It's very focused. But we have a second vision. That vision is called peripheral vision. That's what we see around the edges. That is in black and white, and that sees shadows, and that sees things a little bit blurry. So as you look at this image, here's the test I want you to do. When you look at Mona Lisa's eyes with your foveal vision, your peripheral vision sees her mouth, But what it sees is the shadows of her cheekbones, and that makes her appear to be smiling. But then when you take your focus vision down and look directly at her mouth, that shadow disappears and she stops smiling. So if you take a couple of seconds and look back and forth between her eyes and her lips, you'll notice that her smile fades in and out. Take a couple of seconds and do that. It's quite fascinating. Okay. Yes, Robert says from Bothell says her eyes follow her around. Rosie Johnson from Alexandria says it's lazy eyes. There's all kinds of theories about that. Okay. So yes, that's very, very interesting. Now, there is a group of people who came out a few years ago. They studied high-resolution images of Mona Lisa, and they said that if you look very closely at her left eye, you can actually see the letters LV painted there for Leonardo da Vinci. Now, I'm not going to show that, and you can't see that yourself, because the other thing these people claim is that those images are microscopic and cannot be seen. They say that somehow Da Vinci used a very, very tiny microscopic paintbrush and painted a little L and V in there. I don't take that theory very seriously, because these people also claim that in her right eye there's like a B, a 3, or an E, or something like that. The same group also has a petition to disinter Leonardo da Vinci's remains to prove from his skull that he actually painted Mona Lisa as a self-portrait of himself as a woman. So again, you can take these theories for what they're worth. There are all kinds of what I'd call conspiracy theories around Mona Lisa. There are people who swear that if you look in the background of the painting, you see flying saucers, UFOs, and extraterrestrials. I'm not going to get into any of that at all. So we're just going to focus on what's really here in the painting. So going back to the image, zooming up on Mona Lisa, let's talk a little bit about the gentleman behind her, Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, so moving on to the next image. Sorry, my clicker's catching up with me. Oh, okay, here's where I get to talking about the copies. Okay, as I mentioned, there are many copies of Mona Lisa all over the world. This image here is of a copy that's in the Museo Prado in Spain, the Prado Museum. It's been there since 1819, and for years it was simply captioned as copy of the Mona Lisa. In 2012, they went in and decided to do a restoration, and one of the restorers looked at that and they said, you know what? There's something behind all of that black paint. And when they did the restoration, this is what they came up with. A full background behind her. What's interesting is when you hold her up next to Da Vinci's Mona Lisa and compare them side by side, what you'll see is that it's a very similar background, but it's slightly from a different angle. For instance, you can see this over her right shoulder, which is on the left side of the painting. You'll see that the mountain off her left shoulder on the left side is a slightly different perspective than the mountain on the right side. So she's in two slightly different perspectives. This next graphic demonstrates what some people think happened. That Da Vinci and one of his assistants were simultaneously painting Mona Lisa from two different angles. And that's how these two paintings came to effect. And if we look at the next image, what that means is that the face herself is also slightly different perspective, so that if you overlay them with each other, what you can actually do is, if you look through 3D glasses, you actually see a three-dimensional image of Mona Lisa. And again, if you happen to catch this lecture live on a ship when I'm doing it on trade routes of the Middle Ages, I actually bring 3D glasses for people to use, and I show several shots of different parts of the painting so you can see a 3D Mona Lisa. Now, there are other scholars who say this is coincidence, this is hogwash, that can't possibly be. But there are two known facts. Number one, in his sketchbooks, Leonardo and his notebooks, Leonardo did write about 3D stereoscopic images. And number two, it is true that if you hold these two paintings up side by side and look at them through 3D glasses, you actually see a three-dimensional Mona Lisa. So that is absolutely fascinating. Okay, now I'll stop getting ahead of myself and we'll start talking about the artist behind this painting, Da Vinci himself. So let's bring up that next graphic. Okay, Da Vinci, considering how prolific his life was, actually only painted over his lifetime 4 portraits of women. And he did them each about 1 decade apart. Let's look at those. So the first painting he did was of this woman. and he painted her in the 1470s. She now resides in Washington, D.C., and in fact, she is the only Da Vinci portrait that you can see publicly anywhere in the United States. The rest are in private collections. A decade later, he painted this painting in the 1480s. And you'll see Lady with an Ermine, you can see the evolution and development of his artistic style. She currently resides in Poland. A decade later, in the 1490s, he painted this portrait, La Belle Ferronnière, and she currently resides in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. If you've not heard of this museum, years ago, Abu Dhabi came to Paris and said, we would love to have a museum like the Louvre in our country. So the Louvre worked with them, and there's actually a second Louvre in Abu Dhabi, which is where this painting was painted. And then, of course, the fourth painting was done a decade later, and that is our friend La Gioconda, or La Joconde, as somebody pointed out. She was painted in the 1500s over a 3-year period by Da Vinci. She currently resides in the Louvre, Paris. So, moving more into the background of Mona Lisa, who is this a portrait of? As I mentioned, there are several theories about this, but this is the most credible theory, is that she was a woman named Lisa Gherardini. She was a wife and mother. She had 5 children. She was the wife of Francesco del Giocondo. He was a silk merchant who did business with Da Vinci's parents. He was actually a neighbor of the Da Vinci's, and it is believed that this was a commissioned work that Da Vinci did for the gentleman of his wife. Let's zoom in on this picture of an artist's rendition of how she was painted. It took 3 years to paint her. Oh, I got ahead of myself. Let's go back one graphic. Okay. It took so long to paint this painting that Da Vinci had musicians there to play music for Lisa. He had a fountain installed that made little musical notes to make her calm. He had a gentleman there reciting poetry and famous works of literature to keep her from getting bored. As you'll see there on the left side, they actually brought in a white Persian cat and a greyhound dog that she could pet to keep her company. There are some theories that the reason why Lisa is smiling so mysteriously is that she is actually pregnant with her 6th child as she is posing. Don't know if that's historically true, but it is true that she ended up having 6 children. So, next question. How closely does Mona Lisa actually resemble the historical Lisa Gherardini? Now, we don't know because there were no cameras in those days, but we have the next best thing. There is the Strozzi family, who are wine merchants in modern-day Italy, and they are able to trace their direct lineage back to Lisa Gherardini and her family. And so the 2 Strozzi twins, Natalie and Irina, now I can bring up that photo that I prematurely showed, they actually posed with Mona Lisa. So you can determine for yourself how much of a family resemblance there is there. I actually see a family resemblance, so that's kind of funny. Okay, so let's delve now further into the man behind this painting, Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, a question that Gary asked, how long was the journey from Italy to France that Leonardo took with the painting? I'm about to answer that question, so thank you for helping me set that up, Gary. Okay, as I mentioned, from 1503 to 1506, Da Vinci painted Mona Lisa. In 1506, when he was done with the actual modeling work by Lisa Gherardini, he never turned the painting over to her or her family. It became his favorite painting, and he held on to it himself and continued working on her. In fact, there are rumors that he spent 12 years working on her lips alone. In fact, there was a psychologist who explored her lips. Well, it was Margaret Livingstone, the Harvard neurologist, who said that because of the foveal and peripheral vision, the only way that you could paint an exact accurate copy of Mona Lisa is by painting her lips while looking in the other direction. So that's why it took Da Vinci 12 years to paint those lips. Anyway, in 1516, when he was 64 years old, his benefactor, Giuliano de' Medici, died. He was part of the famous Medici family throughout Italy. He was the brother of Pope Leo X. And he was the one, Giuliano de' Medici, he was the one who kept Da Vinci employed as a full-time artist. So after he died, Da Vinci saw no more commissions coming in, wasn't sure how he was going to make his living. But he heard that over in France, they absolutely loved Da Vinci. He was like the Jerry Lewis of his day. So he packed up a caravan of burros with all of his possessions, and to answer Gary's question, took 3 months to travel from Italy to Amboise, France, where he spent the rest of his life. In fact, if you go to Amboise, that is where his grave is. That's where he died and was buried. And that's where he took Mona Lisa. So he carried Mona Lisa with him legally from Italy to France. That is why France possesses Mona Lisa now. Now, when Da Vinci died 3 years later in 1519, Mona Lisa, as well as many of his other works, were inherited by his assistant, Salai. So what happened to Mona Lisa after that? Salai sold her to this gentleman, the next image. This is King Francois I. He purchased her for 4,000 gold coins and had her installed in the palace at Fontainebleau. After the palace at Fontainebleau and King Francois I died, this next gentleman moved her again. This is our old friend, the Sunshine King, King Louis XIV. He had her moved to Versailles. Now, if you've been to Versailles, the palace of the Sunshine King, it is a very ornate Baroque place with gold-plated walls and paintings covering just about every square inch of that palace. So during these days, Mona Lisa simply became another small painting amid hundreds of other paintings surrounding her, no big deal. But after the French Revolution, the authorities moved her for the first time to the Louvre. But she did not stay there because of this next gentleman in this next image. Napoleon Bonaparte took Mona Lisa and had her installed in his boudoir. He said, "I want to see her face every morning when I wake up and every evening when I go to bed." He was just in love with that face. In fact, scholars believe that Mona Lisa is the reason that Bonaparte developed a crush on a young lady named Teresa Guadagni, who was again a direct descendant of Lisa Gherardini. But after Napoleon was banished from France, the painting was again returned to the Louvre, which became her home. And as this next image shows, in those days, this is the late 1890s, early 1900s, she simply hung on the wall in a gallery with other paintings. You could walk right up to her. There was no guard. There was no protection. There were no crowds around her. At this point, she was not a world-famous legendary painting. Now, those of you who've seen one of my lectures know that at heart, I'm a storyteller. So what I'd like to do now is tell a story about the Mona Lisa and how she became a legendary icon of the artwork. Our story is going to begin in August of 1911 with this headline on this next graphic. Okay, what this says is La Joconde a disparu du musée. And if you don't speak French, let's go ahead and zoom in on that and I'll translate it for you. La Joconde has disappeared from the Louvre. In August of 1911, the Mona Lisa was stolen. What's more, it was a full day before anybody realized she had been stolen. The guards came in the morning and they saw her missing off the wall and they said, "Oh, somebody took her out to be cleaned." It was a full day before they realized she was not coming back, and they finally reported it. Needless to say, France went crazy. They closed the Louvre, they examined every square inch of it. All they found was the frame of the Mona Lisa in a closet, but no painting. France actually closed all the exits out of France, the roads, the ports, and tried to identify and stop anybody, but they could not figure out what happened to the Mona Lisa. Okay, moving on to the next image. The newspapers went crazy reporting this. These are some of the headlines in various different languages all over the world. But newspapers are in the business of selling newspapers. And so if we close up on some of the headlines they selected, this is what you see. Great masterpiece, greatest painting in the world. They wanted to hype up the reputation of Mona Lisa to sell more newspapers. This is how she earned the reputation for being that grand and glorious painting. And needless to say, that worked. Because all of a sudden, thousands of people started lining up to go to the Louvre to look at the empty space on the wall where the painting once stood, believe it or not. Okay, so what actually happened to the Mona Lisa? Let me, while we're going through, just double check here. Okay, so, a couple questions coming in. Why don't Mona Lisa's family get the painting since they commissioned it? That's a very good question. Thank you, Linda and Roanoke. My guess is that the answer to that question is because they never actually paid for it. And if they tried paying for it today, they probably would not be able to afford her. Another question, who was the person who last acquired the painting of the Mona Lisa? What would the value of the painting have been in today's euros? I'll get to the value of the Mona Lisa at the end of my talk, but those are all very good questions. Okay, so anyway, so to continue on with my story, what happened to the Mona Lisa? Let's bring up the next graphic. So things went silent, but then 1 week later, somebody shows up at the Paris police station. A little guy named Pierre. Okay, Honoré Joseph Géry Pierre. And he says, I have something to confess. I stole something from the Louvre. Several years ago, I stole some little itty bitty sculptures. Now, this was the only lead that the French police had. And so they grabbed the guy and they said, okay, if you stole these sculptures, then you might have stolen something else. What did you do with these little sculptures that you stole? And Pierre said, well, I gave them to this guy. Now, this guy is Guillaume Apollinaire. He is a poet from the turn of the century. He was also an iconoclast, and he is famous for saying that the Mona Lisa should be burned. So the police hauled Apollinaire into the police station, and they said, what did you do with the Mona Lisa? And Apollinaire said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Now, he did confess to getting these little sculptures from Pierre, but he said, I had no idea they were stolen. And so the police said, what did you do with those sculptures? And Apollinaire said, well, I sold them to this guy, this next guy in the next image. Now, I'm going to stop here and ask the question, does anybody know who this guy is? Now, there's a lag of coming in for questions, so I may move on and then give credit afterwards. But I have a great story to share from Elizabeth in University Park. She says, when I was talking about the Mona Lisa just hanging on the wall with nothing around her, she says, this is the way I saw the painting for the first time. It was 1958, and no one but my parents and I were there. I got close and started to point at the painting when all of a sudden the guards came and grabbed me, think I was going to touch her. Quite a scene. 3 years ago, I was there, and it was a mob scene. Yeah, so the viewing of the Mona Lisa has changed. Just think of how wonderful it would have been to have seen her in those days. So anyway, to answer the question, who was this that Apollinaire sold those sculptures to? I'll review it in this caption. That is none other than our old friend, Pablo Picasso. At the time, Picasso was a starving artist, expatriate from Spain, living in France. So the authorities hauled Picasso into the police station and said, what did you do with the Mona Lisa? And Picasso said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Now, he did confess to having bought the little sculptures from Apollinaire, but he said, I had no idea they were stolen. Nevertheless, the police held Apollinaire and Picasso in jail for several days before they realized they had no case of proof against them, and so they had to let them go. So if you actually Google Picasso, even to this day, you'll see that he was once suspected of stealing the Mona Lisa, which of course he didn't do. So what did happen to the Mona Lisa? Well, to continue our story, let's go on with the next graphic and show what's happening in the investigation. The investigation is a fiasco. The headline here says, should we abandon all hope of finding La Joconde? Tips started flowing in from everywhere, all over the world, some crazy theories. She was in South America. She was in Switzerland. She was in an apartment in the Bronx. J.P. Morgan had secretly stolen her and put her on display in a private collection. She had been spirited out of the country to St. Petersburg. Needless to say, none of these panned out. The head of the Louvre and the head of the Paris police both ended up being fired. And the trail went cold for years. France thought they would never see this painting again. Okay, now let's jump ahead again. Well, what happened next? 2 years later, in December of 1913, you saw this headline in France. La Joconde est retrouvée. La Joconde has been found. Going into an American newspaper headline, you'll see that they actually caught the culprit. Who on earth, what kind of artistic mastermind and genius could have eluded international police, the Louvre, the French police, and gotten away with stealing the most famous painting in the world? Well, it was this guy. Vincenzo Peruggia. Who the heck is Vincenzo Peruggia? Well, needless to say, he was not a famous art thief. He was an amateur artist and handyman. How did he get caught? He showed up in Florence and tried to sell Mona Lisa to an Italian art dealer for $100,000. Peruggia was probably not the sharpest paintbrush in the paint box. Now, the art dealer, being rather astute, recognized the painting, but he played along. He actually brought in the head of the Uffizi Art Gallery to ascertain that this was indeed the Mona Lisa. The head of the Uffizi came in, he looked at it, and he said, "Yep, this is the Mona Lisa, all right." They promptly called the police and had Vincenzo arrested. So, we know who did it. How did he do it? Well, here's a reconstructed graphic from the newspapers. This is what happened. At the turn of the century, there was a lot of anarchy going on. A lot of paintings were being defaced and demolished. In fact, anarchy is what caused the start of World War I at the beginning of the century. A lot of museums like the Louvre decided that they needed to protect some of their priceless works of art. So they hired various handymen to construct glass cases to put around the painting. Vincenzo Peruggia was one of those handymen. He was given a Louvre ID badge, a Louvre set of overall outfit. He was given permission to be in there with the paintings up close, put his hands on them. So this is what Vincenzo did. One night, he hid in a closet until after the museum closed. Early the next morning, before the museum opened, he came out of the closet, he walked up to the Mona Lisa, took her off the wall, went back to the closet, took her out of the frame, that's why the frame was found in the closet, wrapped her up in bundling paper, and walked out the Louvre with her. This foolproof plan ran into one snag, as this next image shows, when he discovered that because it was before hours, the door exiting the building of the Louvre was locked, and he couldn't get out. Now, he had planned for this possibility and brought various locksmith tools, but as he was not the most competent guy, he was not able to get the door opened. So here's Vincenzo Peruggia with the Mona Lisa under his arm, desperately trying to get out of the Louvre before it opens and crowds come in, and all of a sudden, he hears footsteps behind him. Who is it? He turns around, it's the plumber. The plumber says, "Oh, I see you've locked yourself in the building. Don't worry, that happens all the time. Here, let me unlock the door for you." So the plumber unlocked the door, Vincenzo said thank you, and left with the painting. So for the next 2 years, where was Mona Lisa while everybody all over the world was desperately searching for her? She was right here in this next graphic. She was in Vincenzo's shabby little apartment in Paris at the bottom of a clothes trunk. She stayed there for 2 years until Peruggia thought that it was safe to leave the country. He left, he brought Mona Lisa to Italy, and there tried to sell her and was promptly caught. Okay, so now we know who did it. We know how he did it. Why did he do it? Well, this next image shows our friend Vincenzo on trial in Italy. He claimed, as I stated before, that Napoleon had stolen Mona Lisa from Italy and kidnapped her and took her to France. And he was trying to restore Mona Lisa to her rightful country. Now, of course, this is factually incorrect, but it made Vincenzo Peruggia a folk hero with the Italian public. They said, "What a great patriot, go, go, go." And his trial turned into something of a circus. Fortunately, the judge and the jury decided to stick with the facts. And Vincenzo was sentenced to 7 years in prison for the theft. That was later converted to time served. And ironically, after he was a free man, he went back to France, opened up a paint store, and spent the rest of his life there. Okay, now what about Mona Lisa? Well, Italy and France worked it out that because France legally owned her, the painting would be returned to France. But for a magical week before the French came and picked her up, the Mona Lisa was displayed to the public in the Uffizi Art Gallery in Florence. So for the first and only time in history, you could go to Florence, you could go to the Uffizi and see the Mona Lisa hanging in that art gallery. That's amazing. Okay, she was ultimately returned to France, as this next graphic shows, and she was returned with much pomp and circumstance. As one historian put it, Mona Lisa left France as a painting, she returned as an immortal icon. And that is how the legend of Mona Lisa was secured. But that's not the end of my story, because that is not the last time that Mona Lisa left the Louvre. Let me just check up here and make sure. Lydia Johnson asked, what was the punishment for stealing Mona Lisa? It was 7 years, but it was later converted to time served. So my next trivia question for you is, when was the next time that Mona Lisa left the Louvre? And while I'm waiting for answers to come in, I'll go ahead and finish telling my story. As this next graphic shows, it was during World War I, when these gentlemen came to Paris. That is Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. If you know your history, you know that the Nazis came into Paris. They came to Charles de Gaulle and said, we give you two choices. You can let Germany occupy France and Paris, or we can burn the city to the ground. And de Gaulle reluctantly said, you may occupy Paris. Now, if you also know your history, you know that Hitler was an amateur artist himself and loved works of art. He was obsessed with art. So much so, in fact, that everywhere he went, whether it was raiding a Jewish person's home or raiding an entire country, he had his art experts come in and steal any art of value. He amassed 12,000 paintings and sculptures and had them hidden here in this next graphic, in an abandoned salt mine in Austria. His plan was, after he won the war and conquered the world, he was going to open the world's greatest museum, of course with his name on it, and it would display all the world famous paintings and sculptures for everybody to see under the Third Reich. Now, when the Nazis started losing World War II, the question came up, what to do with all these works of art? The SS agent in charge of it, a guy named Eigruber, was a maniac. He decided that if Hitler could not have these paintings, nobody could have these paintings. And he had a plan that he was going to blow up the salt mine and everything in it. Fortunately, the Austrians got wind of this and they launched an operation, sent 4 Austrian spies into there and tried to infiltrate and do whatever they could red tape wise to prevent this plan from being carried out. At the same time as this next graphic shows, the Allies assembled a cadre of famous Western art historians and experts. They became known as the Monument Men. There was actually a movie about them made a few years ago. And they went in and they successfully rescued all of this artwork. And so we have them to thank. In fact, if you've been on a Viking ocean cruise, one of the things they have, which is absolutely fascinating, is they have Viking historians who run roundtables of conversational groups. The last time I was on a cruise, one of the historians ran a roundtable about whether the reputation and saving of a painting is worth the possible cost of a human life. It was a very, very fascinating discussion. That's something you can discuss after we get off the call today with your family of, is rescuing these paintings worth possibly sacrificing human life in battle in order to do so? It's an open question. Anyway, both the Austrian spies and the Monument Men recorded in their notebooks that among the paintings they cataloged was the Mona Lisa. However, she does not show up on any other list of when these paintings were actually returned to the museums. So the question is, was she ever in the Alsace salt mine? Well, the Louvre itself will not answer that question. All they will say is that the Mona Lisa was taken away and restored back to the Louvre after World War II. Here is the theory. The theory is that the Louvre took a copy of the Mona Lisa and put her in one of these trucks There were 5 trucks that took famous artwork and spread them all over France in anticipation to escape the Nazis. And they had this copy that sent the Nazis on a wild goose chase, and that's what ended up in the salt mine. The theory is that the actual Mona Lisa was hidden in a basement and never left the Louvre. Now, again, that's an open question. Nobody will actually say one way or another, but it's, again, a fascinating story. But that's still not the end of my story, because that is still not the last time Mona Lisa left the Louvre. The next time was in this next image that I'm going to show. It was in the 1960s, and if you're an American or a lover of history, you will know that that is Jackie Kennedy in the gown with her husband, John Kennedy, on the far left when he was president of the United States. They happened to be visiting with Charles de Gaulle, and Jackie Kennedy said, "Please, Mr. de Gaulle, would you allow us to display the Mona Lisa just for a short period of time?" And of course, nobody says no to Jackie Kennedy. So de Gaulle said, "But of course you may." And so for 1 month, Mona Lisa left the Louvre and toured Washington, D.C. at the National Museum of Art and New York at the Metropolitan Museum of the Arts. She was guarded 24 hours a day by the U.S. Marines. She spent 2 weeks at each location, and there was a 2-hour wait in line to see her. Again, if anybody has any interesting stories to share about you or your parents actually having seen Mona Lisa in America, feel free to share those. If we have time, I'll get to some of those. In addition to that, Mona Lisa did do one last tour in the 1970s. She went to Tokyo and Russia. And in Tokyo, the Japanese, as a present to Paris, constructed that 18-pound, 3-panel thick bulletproof glass case that I showed at the very beginning. That's how Mona Lisa got that case. It was a gift from Japan to France. And it's very lucky that she is in that case, because as this next slide shows, there were several attempts to vandalize Mona Lisa through the years. Let me go ahead and go to the first bullet here. So in 1956, the entire lower half of the painting was actually doused with acid. It took them years to restore. So the version you see here and the version you see at the Louvre, actually the entire bottom half of the painting has been restored from acid. That same year, some guy tried to throw a rock at Mona Lisa and succeeded in taking a chip out of her left shoulder, her left elbow. In fact, you can see it there in that image. If you go and view the Mona Lisa today, you'll see that there's still a chip of paint missing from her left elbow. Moving on, next bullet. In 1974, that is when Japan finally put her behind a glass case to protect her. And that is just as well, because that same year, going to the next bullet, somebody tried spray painting the Mona Lisa. Again, not the sharpest paintbrush in the paint box. They succeeded in spray painting the glass, but did not damage the painting. Now, the last major instance where she was attempted to be vandalized happened in 2009, per this next bullet. There was a Russian who was very mad that he was not granted a French residency visa. So he took a souvenir mug, it might have said "Welcome to Paris" or something like that, and tried throwing it at the painting. All it did was bounce off the glass. He was promptly hauled away and arrested. So after that, Mona Lisa has been protected behind these 3 panes of bulletproof glass. So let me go ahead and close up on our master shot of Mona Lisa and give some closing comments for my presentation. Okay, questions come up. Should she be insured? Years ago, the last time that Paris tried insuring her, she was valued at $800 million. The Louvre decided that for the cost of the insurance, it was actually cheaper to hire a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week armed guard to stand guard around her. That's what they did. Today, Mona Lisa is considered priceless and uninsurable, so they have no choice. Second question that comes up, should Mona Lisa be restored? There are a lot of scientists and historians who say that, you know, if you just cleaned her up a bit, her colors would really, really pop. The browns would become pink. The yellows would become white, and she would look very, very pristine. In fact, the image that I've been showing you, you've been seeing throughout my presentation, is a computer-enhanced image to make the colors look brighter. If you go and view her in person, she is actually a little bit more dull, as you may have seen from the first pictures. The Louvre is reluctant to do any kind of restoration for 2 reasons. Number one, They cannot guarantee that if they put any kind of chemical or cleanser on her, that it's not going to destroy the paint. Number two, they can't be sure that even if they did clean her, that she would look any different. It's just a theory that her colors are brighter. Now, they have done X-ray imaging and discovered that there are actually 30 layers of paint under what you see where Da Vinci was painting various versions of Mona Lisa. Some of these are no thicker than the width of a human hair. But what they do show is that in earlier versions, Lisa's face was broader, her smile was a little bit more apparent, and actually two of her fingers were in different locations. But France has decided not to do anything. The last time she was cleaned was in the 1950s when they just got some of the dust off of her. But the Louvre has ultimately decided that Mona Lisa will never again leave the Louvre, and she will never be restored or touched. So the way I like to put it is that Mona Lisa is where she is, and Mona Lisa is what she is. And that is what you get to see today if you go on a Viking cruise and go to Paris and visit the Louvre. So that is my presentation of fascinating facts about the Mona Lisa. And so let me go ahead and consult my handy dandy tablet here and see if we have any questions coming in that I could help answer. Okay. Oh, good grief. A lot of you have been very, very active. Yes, Lydia, you're very active here from Roanoke. That was the Monument Men, and that many Allied Monument Men did lose their lives over this. So that would be an interesting discussion for you to have. Is the painting worth the life of a person? Okay, what else do we have in here? How did they determine the owners of many of these paintings after the war? We're talking about some of the paintings that were in the Alsace salt mines. To tell you the truth, that is actually a question that is still being debated today. There are lawsuits to this day, especially of families and descendants of Jewish people who perished in the Holocaust, who say, this was a painting that was my family's painting. It is now in a museum. We would like it back for our family. And when they are able to come up with some kind of documented proof, the museums are trying to be very fair about doing this, but needless to say, this is a controversial issue because this is how museums earn their bread and butter. It makes the artwork available for the public to see, and to go back to its rightful owner is one side of the argument. To take it out of public view is another side of the argument. It is still being debated today. Okay, Bob and Lisa from Bothell said they saw it in New York in 1963, 1 hour after having wisdom teeth extracted. Well, good for you. I hope you didn't have to wait in line for 2 years. How much was Da Vinci's genius acknowledged during his lifetime? Gary Graff, I have to thank you. I was going to make the comment at the very end of this presentation that I love the interactivity that I'm seeing here, because Viking really does listen to your comments and your questions. In fact, one of the reasons that I'm here today on Viking.TV is because a passenger recommended me to Viking. Thank you, Gary. So to get to your question, how much was Da Vinci's genius acknowledged during his lifetime? Broadly and famously. Very, very much so. In fact, I was going to make the comment that when I showed Da Vinci's 4 portraits that he made of women, in fact, all of his other portraits, Mona Lisa is one of the only pieces of art that he did not sign. And yet, it is one of the only pieces of his art that is known without a shadow of a doubt to be Da Vinci's, because so many contemporary accounts of what he was doing mention Mona Lisa, describe Mona Lisa. He was famous in his lifetime. He was written about all the time. That is how we know Mona Lisa is Da Vinci's painting, even though his name does not appear on the painting. His notebooks, his inventions, his sculptures, his frescoes, yes, he was very, very well known. Okay, I've gotten some very, very nice compliments from people. Thank you very much. Okay, Lauren from McCullough says, I saw her at the Louvre when I was in Paris on business. I went late in the afternoon. It was crowded, but nowhere as bad as what you showed. I'm so glad for you, Lauren. I'm so glad to know why the glass, because it was annoying to see the painting that had so much glare. Yes, that's the price we pay. Unfortunately, I wish there was a way that you could view the painting without all the glare and the glass and the crowds around. Go right after opening, go right before closing, go during the off season. She is well worth seeing, and she is well worth seeing for more than 15 seconds. Okay, when is the best time to visit the museum according to Jean? Yes, I just answered that question. Okay, so more comments from people. Oh, I'm being handed a note here. Okay, let's see. Okay, isn't it monuments men, plural? Um, if I made a typo in my slide, I apologize. It could be monuments men. I'm sure somebody can tell me what the name of the movie was. Was the movie called Monument Men or Monuments Men? I thought it was called The Monument Men. So if it's Monuments Men, thank you, Walter. I stand corrected. You just taught me something today. So I see other comments in here. I'm not going to have time for all of them. Adam from California, bless your heart. Is Mona Lisa smoking? I can let you know that after 500 years, yes, she's still smoking, and she's still just attractive as she's always been. Somebody else asks, how many cruises a year my wife Gail and I do? It depends on the year. We try to get on a fairly regular basis. Unfortunately, currently the number of cruises we're on is 0. But like you, I can hardly wait to get back onto a cruise again. I absolutely know that Viking is working behind the scenes to make this as safe as possible, and they will not let people cruise until they can guarantee their safety. So in the meantime, we have wonderful, wonderful things like Viking.TV to hold your interest. As I mentioned before, please keep your comments, your feedback, your questions, your suggestions coming to Viking. They care about what you have to say. They listen to what you have to say. I see what you have to say. And on that happy note, I would like to wish you a wonderful, wonderful week and the rest of your day. Stay in touch with Viking TV, and maybe, luck willing, you'll see me here again. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.